Hello Sofa Squad, welcome back to the dang sofa. How's everybody out there doing? Today we are going to be talking about another installment, another review of the TV show Cellmate Secrets, Cellmate Confessions, whatever you want to call it. It's serving hot tea on notorious terrible people. And today we're going to be we're going to be talking about the specific one about Susan Smith. Now, while some of the topics about Susan Smith are a little tawdry, did we really think it was going to be anything less? And are we really surprised? Not really. Now, before we jump in, if you like scary movies, if you like reviews, if you like story times, if you like all three combined into one, consider looking at my other channel, A Slice of Spice and a Dice movie reviews. And if you also want to see even more from me, consider joining the channel memberships or Patreon. There you're going to find a lot more videos on like personal story times, absurdly hilarious criminals, and some that are just too hot to like dish on this channel. So that's all there. And on that note, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to everyone for making that sofa possible and this Sofa Squad member possible. I wouldn't be here without you. Thank you to the Patreons, the channel members, people who subscribe, people who watch, people who like, people who comment, people who share. Thank you very much. It makes this sofa the place to be. Now on that note, let's get to dishing on this nasty little mama. Okay, so we're going back in time. We're talking about 1994. We're talking about the woman who took her car with her two babies in it, her two children, her two sons, and she drowned them in a lake. She like drove them off the boat ramp. It wasn't that clean cut though. She concocted a story and said that a black man carjacked her car with her kids in it and took off, and eventually when all this happened, he was the one that did it. So she would eventually have to come clean, and this was after, I'm talking about going all over the news and pretending to cry and just crazy stuff. She came clean and it was a shock. And that was that. She came clean to doing that, and she ended up in prison for the rest of her life, where she totally belongs. Okay, so that's how we arrive at this TV show. Now, in this show, there are three specific people that we're going to talk about. Okay, four. Susan Smith being one of them. She obviously is the center of this. All these lives wouldn't have been destroyed without her. That seems to be her only claim to life itself. But she's at the center of it. Now, there's three other people. Two of them are former cellmates, and one of them is a former, and I do mean former, correctional officer. And we're going to talk about him first. So Alfred Rowe was a correctional officer at the institution that Susan was at, the first one. Now, he was like a prison captain, and he would say, you know what, I was a young buck. I was kind of cocky and full of myself with my position. Now, he ends up working in the women's ward, the women's unit, whatever you want to call it, and he describes the first time he met Susan Smith. And he's like, yeah, she was a really attractive young lady, and, that was that. Now, he said being a male working in the women's unit brought with it certain, issues or whatever. And he was like, a lot of these women would do things like on their way to the shower, they would drop their towel too soon in front of him or things of that nature. And he said Susan was totally one of those that liked to show off for him and kind of, tease him or whatever. So he ends up talking to Susan, and he's like, we would have these conversations in the evenings, and we would talk about, remorse. And he said, she did have an expressed remorse for what she did. She knew she made a mistake by taking the lives of her sons, but they never really talked about like the details of it. So, there's that. And he did say, yeah, she was totally flirty. That was just her persona. And we'll hear these other former cellmates talk about how, she was a nice person. Like, it was hard to not like her, say you didn't know her type thing, you didn't know what she had done. So, obviously she's going to be flirty with this dude, and there's that. And again, like I said, he was kind of cocky as his like little prison captain thing. Now, he did say, there's at one point that I started kind of fantasizing, being a young man, what it would be like to be with one of the women. And so that's where I want to kind of pause and sofa sidebar this before we go any further about his story, because earlier I was like, oh, she's continued to destroy these lives and stuff. He was a willing participant in this situation. I don't really have that much sympathy for him. It is what it is. I don't look at him as a victim of hers at all. I think he did something incredibly stupid. So there's that. Now, here's my thing also. I just am kind of like, when you're starting to fantasize about the women inmates, and to me I'm almost like that's like a fetish or something, and I just feel like maybe that was a point that he should have been like, maybe I shouldn't be working in the women's unit, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe this isn't the best place for me because this is just going to be too tempting. So, you know, there's that. Let's continue. So behind the scenes of all of this, he's describing what's going on with Susan. So first of all, he's like, look, she became like a jailhouse snitch to kind of make herself useful to him so that she maybe wouldn't get moved out of like in that center, but out of that unit or whatever. She just wanted to be relevant to him. Behind the scenes, though, she's wanting to get moved to another institution so that she can be closer to her mother. Now, he said, look, that can take forever. There's red tape. There's all sorts of stuff that has to happen. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we continue on with this story. So he continues on and he's like, look, I feel like Susan saw an opportunity to take advantage and she ran with it. And he was like, one night there was some kind of like function in the gymnasium or whatever. And he's like, we had to clean up afterwards. And when we say we, I mean Susan was a trustee who was going to clean the gym up. Now, he was like in some office in the gymnasium or whatever. So to me, it sounds like there's no cameras, nobody else around. And this is the opportunity that Susan was like, Mr. Officer, I feel the need to perform a certain service on you. And he was like, baby, I thought you'd never ask. And so he lets her do this to him. And he's describing this and he's like, here's this beautiful 25-year-old woman who's just performed this on me and didn't want anything in return at all. It was a real ego boost. Again, so for sidebar, on that part I was like, let's just break this down. First of all, she's an inmate. Now, I'm not saying anything about that, but it's the power struggle where I'm just like, she's an inmate. I don't care how hot you thought she was, whatever. That's an inmate. You have power over that person. The pendulum, whatever you call it, the scales are completely off with that. On top of it, okay, this is Susan Smith. All I can think about is that reenactment of the car and her kids probably clawing out the window, you know, like trying to get out of the car while she sat there and watched them drown. And I'm just like, I wouldn't be able to look at her and not think of that. So the fact that he's like, yeah, it's a real ego boost. I'm like, dude, we need to work on self-esteem or something, because this should not be an ego boost, okay? Like, it should be like the opposite of ego boost. Now, also, side note on that, he has a wife at home who literally says the person that she despises the most in the world is Susan Smith. Just like seeing her on TV, all that kind of stuff. And she's like, who could do this to their children? Imagine finding out that your husband had an affair with Susan Smith. Oh my God. Well, that's exactly what ends up happening. So him and his wife and their kids, whatever, they go on a vacation. He's like, we're on vacation. And I start getting calls from, like, I guess, coworkers and stuff. And they're like, what did you do? You know, you're being looked for. You know, they need you in here. And what happened is Susan went and told other guards, whoever, the powers that be, about this, you know, service she performed. And I'm just like, yeah, that whole thing about she didn't want anything in return, of course she did. And she just got it. Because within weeks, she was shipped off to the prison that she had been wanting to go to. And he was fired and faced legal consequences. So that's his little story, but we're going to come back to it in a few minutes to discuss what happened. Let's fill in some of the blanks with the stories of her former cellmates. So she had a couple of different ones, and one of them was named Stephanie. Now, Stephanie served from like 2009 to 2012, and this was at the new center. And Stephanie would say, like, basically, she didn't know a whole bunch about Susan's crimes. Like, she knew she killed her babies. Susan was like, look, there was women in there who did, like, way worse than Susan. And what I mean by that, because it's like, okay, if you killed your kid, you killed your kid, but like on the spectrum of that, I guess you could say, it was like Susan's was bad, but there's people who like went even above and beyond something like that. I'm thinking, I don't know, whatever, but that's what she said. So she was one of the ones that said, you know what, I mean, I became friends with her. I was apprehensive at first to become friends with her because of the obvious, but she was like, you almost couldn't not like Susan because she was so nice. And I do find that interesting because I think Susan is totally totally manipulative, narcissistic, so anything you want to diagnose her with, just go and slap it on her. So of course she's nice, of course she's manipulative, of course she's all these things. So let's talk about the other cellmate. Now her name was Christy. And she's like a little spitfire. Honestly, she reminds me of a character on Orange is the New Black, and I can't remember the character's name right now, but she reminds me of her, and she's just this little spitfire country girl. So she had a lot to say about Susan. First of all, she said that she has seen a couple of officers come and go behind Susan, and the way that that dude lost his job. That Susan was very much into, you know, intimate relations with a variety of people, officers included. So Christy says that she came in, and she was pretty young when she came in. She had never had a mother figure or anything like that, came from kind of a broken home, and she ends up being roomed with Susan. And she was like, at first I was like, I'm gonna make her life miserable. You know, she's like, I was like ransacking her locker, doing all this crazy stuff, because she's like, that's a baby killer. You know what I'm saying? So she's like, I'm gonna make her life miserable. Now Christy would end up becoming, well, she called it Susan's guppy, but almost like her little lap dog. So one of the things going on in there is like there's the whole prison industry of how you make money in there. Now Christy had a side business of making, how should we say this, pleasure items that women would use to have private time with themselves. And she made one on the show, and it was very interesting, and it was very, you know, like, oh, okay, mama, how many honey buns did that cost? So, but that was how Christy, you know, that was her gig, that's what she did. So she said that Susan had a lot of money, because she had family that would send her money, and then she had admirers and men that she would work over. And so she said Susan had a lot of money, which equates to a lot of commissary, a lot of hygiene products, stuff like that, and that's like gold in there. So Susan had money to spend on kind of, you know, making people do things for her, and Christy was one of those people. Now Christy would describe how Susan would like do some kind of job in the visitation thing where she worked with kids, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So, but Christy said that one time they were in there and Susan was talking to Christy's son, and she was like, you can call me Aunt Susan, and Christy's like, oh no, the F he ain't. You know, and I don't blame her. I mean, can you imagine? And she was like, nope, you don't get that. No, absolutely not. Now, Christy also said that Susan had an insatiable drive for, like I said, intimate moments with pretty much everybody. She said that Susan was really into butch women that look like men, and she said it was very ironic because she said, you know what, that whole fake thing she made up of the black guy that, you know, saying, oh, a black man, you know, hijacked me or whatever, carjacked me, I'm sorry, hijacked me, that whole thing, she was like, the kind of women that Susan was into was the description that Susan had made up of the person who allegedly had done this to her kids. So I'm just like, oh my God, you could literally get your psych degree and just unpack that right there. Now, Christy would act as like a guard or a lookout for Susan to, you know, have these moments. And she was like, honey, she did it everywhere. Our room, the refrigerator, you name it. She said even in a dumpster one time. And I'm like, that is just so suiting. Now, she also said that Susan, obviously we already know this, was a master manipulator. Like I said, she would manipulate with money, food items, stuff like that. And that she had like these other parts of her personality. She said there was like completely other personalities within her. And she was like, one of them was just a monster, and that's probably the part that her children saw in those last moments of desperation on her end. But she said like one time she got in a fight with her lover, and she was like, you know, I killed my effing kids, you think I care about yours, and stuff like that, and just this really dark, angry, evil side. Now also what was interesting is that she said when the anniversary would come up of the event of what Susan did, she would get like really depressed and moody. She's attempted to take her own life several times, and Christy said that her wrist looked mutilated from how much damage Susan has done to them. I do not feel sorry for that whatsoever at all. It sounds like some of it was for attention, and some of it was for probably taking it too far a few times where she had to end up going to the hospital and whatnot. So it sounds like she's living in her own personal hell like that, and I'm here for it. So at the end of the day, Stephanie, the other inmate we talked about, she had never really looked into the crime that much. So in the show, they showed her like some of the news footage and stuff like that. She was like, yeah, I'd never even seen this. And I'm like, my God. But they also showed her that reenactment they did with the car, and she was just like, I'm speechless. And I mean, that's what my mind goes to as well, because that was so horrifying to watch, and to know that Susan saw it in real life while she was doing that, and knowing her kids were in there, and to be able to go out and lie and do all that, I'm just like, my God. Now, the other lady, Christine, the one we were just talking about, Christy, she's been sober at the time of the recording for like a year. Now, neither of them ever really had anything else to do with Susan after the fact or whatever. Like, they got out and they're like, girl, bye. Like, you know, we're done kind of thing. Now, Alfred Rowe, he had a little bit of a different story. So he ended up pleading guilty. He got 5 years probation, and he was put on the SO list, like, for the rest of his life. And there's that. His wife actually stayed with him, though, and that's like the only thing good that came out of it, he said. He's basically been unemployed ever since, because, I mean, how are you going to get a job being on that list? And especially if that even went into any kind of details about what you did and who it was with, all that. I mean, that's pretty notorious. I mean, that's all over the newspapers and stuff, so it's not a cute look. You know, stay tuned for my next installment. I'm going to watch another episode. I don't know if it'll be the Chris Watts one, but I love these, and I love coming back here and dishing about them with y'all. Again, thank you to everybody who makes this sofa possible. I really appreciate it. And that's it. Until next time, I'll see you then.